Great. Well, we are here today on the Gravity Podcast with Ilya Bodner. Ilya, I am proud to call you a friend. I've really enjoyed the time we've spent together over the years now and have been just really impressed with what you've created and how you've created it. I think I actually was first, I was introduced to you or made aware of you through a mutual friend of ours, Bruce Saul, who sometimes listens to the podcast. So maybe he's listening now. He's the great connector, mentor in my life. And I remember him kind of talking about you as this like serial entrepreneur early on, before anything that I know you have created today. But you have been, a pretty strong creator for a long time in the entrepreneurial space. And I have greatly admired that as well. So anyway, looking forward to diving in and talking more about your journey. And thanks for being here.
Definitely. Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed to get to know you over the last couple of years. And if Bruce is listening, I'd like to tell him that I kind of want to be like him when I grow up when it comes to networking and connecting people. He's like spot on every single time on all the sage advice and the connections he makes. That's pretty remarkable to have that skill set.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing. You and I are maybe, going down parallel paths here as we, shift through life. And I also, just look at the impact that somebody like Bruce and other mentors and people, in my life have had in giving me sage advice and sometimes very simple advice. And sometimes it's connections and introductions and in its totality, it's like massive. It's really life transforming. And so to be able to do that for other people is super rewarding and fulfilling. And I'm sure, Bruce would say the same thing. So anyway, a big Bruce love fest. Hi, Bruce, if you're listening. Ilya, let's go back and start at the beginning. Tell me a little bit about your early childhood, your upbringing, your family dynamics, and kind of what started to shape you at a very early age.
Sure. Well, how far do we want to go? Well, let's start with the obvious. So I'm from a place called Tashkent, which is in Uzbekistan. It's part of the former Soviet Union. When I meet people these days, I tell them I'm from Russia just because it's easier than the long-winded. When, unfortunately, not a lot of people know on the map where things are these days. But I was born in Uzbekistan, in Tashkent, and my family isn't from there. My grandfather told me the story many times of how they ended up there, which is basically World War II happened. He's a teenager. His mother throws him on a train and tells him to take that train to the last stop on the railroad tracks. And the final stop in the Soviet Union on that railroad track that he was on, he couldn't go any further, was Tashkent, which was like the outpost. So these days I tell people, imagine taking the Amtram or whatever to wherever the hell it drops you off outside of Seattle. That's kind of where he went to get away from the front. And he grew up and started a family there. And others had a similar story of just trying to run away, get away as far as they could. Interesting spot to be brought on. It was my childhood, so I didn't know anything different. But around when I turned 10 or so, we immigrated to the United States. My upbringing was pretty low key. We're from a small little suburb, I guess you could call it like that, for those that understand what I'm talking about, and kind of all moved out here. And I actually remember when I was 10 years old, my parents took out a map and put on the dining room table and said, we're moving to, and of course mispronounced it, this place called Columbus, Ohio. And the cool fact about it, it's the 14th largest city in America. And I'm like, oh, cool. We're going to go to Chicago. We're going to go to Vegas. We're going to go to LA. Like, no. I think it's here. Or no, I think it's here. they're like trying to point on the map where it is.
Yeah.
And my friends these days, I tell them, it's like, can you name the 14th largest city in China? It's like your parents telling you, hey, we're moving to China. It's the 14th largest city. We're like, oh, we're going to Shanghai, right? Like everyone says.
Yeah.
So we ended up in Columbus. I remember landing here, seeing the CMH airport and that funny little squiggly, the design that they have out there. And started here, went to middle school, high school, and then eventually Ohio State University.
Ilya, let me just jump in for a second before we get too far down the path, because right away I'm curious. This 0 to 10. I mean, just taking the train, last stop. Obviously those are formative years, but very early childhood years too. Your early childhood, though, pretty unique, and I don't want to kind of gloss over like. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like, what memories do you have of that experience? And also, I'd like to better understand like what memories you have of coming to the United States. Like, that again, I have childhood memories from, 0 to 10 and in that range. I moved to Columbus when I was 10, but from Akron, right? But it was a big deal, right? So tell me a little bit more about kind of like what that memories like, what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, respect the journalism here. Dig into the stories. I did gloss over that. So we're Jewish, and we were certainly the minority in Tashkent. It was a highly Muslim country, which, by the way, took everyone in as their brothers and cousins. Kind of one of those magical places where folks are friendly with, regardless of the background. Religiously persecuted, quiet. You couldn't really practice it. We kind of grew up all kind of in our own little nook. I have some memories of being picked on and talked about as that kid and all that stuff. So it was not all sunshine and rainbows, certainly. And when my parents and our family were given the opportunity to get the hell out of there, they grabbed it and ran with it and didn't even question if it was the 14th largest city or whatever it was. America was the better land, and you don't know much about it, but you just, Michael Jordan and Mickey Mouse, and that's the coolest thing ever. And you want to be part of that, not anything else. So I remember growing up, actually, funny enough, having these black market VHSs of Michael Jordan and the Bulls playing, and that was like the coolest thing ever. And I actually have it's funny you're digging this out of me. I haven't thought about this for years, but when I was 8, the first McDonald's opened up in Moscow. And I'm sure you can see, like, even on YouTube, where the President Yeltsin took like a shot and opened it up. It was like a big deal. And I bugged the hell out of my parents to go there. This was the thing that I wanted to do to get a taste of what it was all about. And they took me, and we stood in line for hours. And I remember my dad bribed somebody to cut in line, and I still have the taste of that McFlurry in my mouth. That's how amazing it was. It was the coolest thing ever. I think that's why I'm so obsessed with Mickey D's to this day. Is like I just wanted it so bad as a kid, and I got to taste it when I was 8, and we went through that whole experience to get it. In hindsight, I'm sure it was the nastiest food my parents could have gotten me. Just grew up, in a slightly turbulent times when Soviet Union fell, and there was a lot of uncertainty, and folks with my kind of background weren't, proudly and openly walking the streets. So I think that shaped me a little bit of always, trying to be quiet and not make a lot of attention and draw a lot of attention to yourself.
And do you have memories of like what it was like for your parents, or have you talked to them about what it was like to be in that turbulent time with a young family, to be Jewish, to aspire to go to America? It's kind of very like what you would expect. McDonald's, Michael Jordan, Mickey Mouse, right? Like iconic and appears to be amazing. And I'm wondering.
And it was amazing, by the way. It was the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, a lot of my memories are spotty, and it's through stories and conversation I have from my parents, and I certainly lived it, but I was a kid mostly. And my cousins are very close. I have a lot of cousins who are a little older than me. They got to experience it as teenagers too. And yeah, yes, many stories. There could be books written about it. Everything from the camps and the jail time that some of the adults had in our family to the you can't get an education. In Russia, everyone has a passport, and that passport it has your religion and your ethnicity. They don't do that in America, but that's how they do it in Russia. So you just look at someone's passport and you're instantly denied or given access to something. That's just how it works there. And no one even questions it. And so, yeah, there's certainly things you couldn't do that really drove them nuts. And it would any logical person, I think, that they had to get through. So given the opportunity, they got out immediately as quickly as they could.
And why Columbus? I mean, I know 14th city, you point on the map, but was there something more? I've always wondered, how people end up in Columbus.
Yeah, we should probably bring Bruce on the show so he can give you the better background of that story, given his advice, since we mentioned his name. But I think we were just presented a choice, Israel or America. Went with America because I think my parents just thought it would be the land of opportunity that everyone wanted, and why not? And then why Columbus? You need a sponsor and you need some heritage line to draw to it. We were, I think, more or less of a lottery system, got drawn to the local Columbus community that helped sponsor the other side of that equation. And there was organizations that literally flew people out. I don't know how deep you want me to go given your audience, but I'll keep it at this level, that were drawn to Columbus, and New York was a big destination, Cleveland, et cetera. Luck of the draw a little bit. And the other part a little bit is, as I got a little bit older and actually connected the dots on our family heritage, turns out we do have family that when the war came, lived on a river. And one side of that river fell under Nazi occupation, and the other side of that river didn't. And the other side of that river found their way to America and landed somewhere around the Dayton area. And so through that lineage, we were able to kind of show, hey, we have roots around this area, give or take. Columbus is a big city.
Mm-hmm. And tell me a little bit more about you get here, you arrive here in Columbus, and you're 10. What's life like for you? How does it compare to what you imagine it to be? How is the assimilation process, now in a new country?
Yep, sure. So as a child, my best memories. So we had this crazy thing. So we had to take a midnight train out of Tashkent to Moscow, where the charter flight was flying to JFK, then Columbus. And we had to leave quietly so no one would see, because they were always worried about all sorts of ruffling. And so we got through that, and it was a little bit confusing as a kid. We get to Moscow, quietly find this plane, get on it, and we land in JFK. And I remember my parents buying me a Mars candy bar and one of those greasy, nasty JFK hot dogs.
Oh, yeah.
Nathan's or something. So I have those two memories. I was like, this is so cool.
Yeah.
This is the coolest thing ever. I don't know if anyone else shares it, but
that's great.
To me, that was like, that's it. We made it. This is home. So that's memory one. And then memory two, on the leg between JFK and Columbus, we got to watch Looney Tunes on a TV on the plane. And I don't think I've ever seen that many American cartoons that, like that readily available. So that was the other cool part of it. So that's as a kid. Mm-hmm. Now, looking back as an adult at this, it was obviously a very complicated and confusing time. And I'm glad, as a family, we were able to make it fun and exciting, but certainly very challenging. Imagine packing everything you have into a 50-pound suitcase. That's the limit. And leaving and starting a new home.
Yeah.
What would you take with you? And how would you explain it to your kids?
Yeah, I think that the last part, like how would you explain it to your kids? I'm really moved by the courage. And these stories I've heard people here. They're not uncommon, but when you start to think about like, well, you're a friend, and we're both parents, and I know you now. But to think about being in that situation, both as a child and maybe even more challenging as a parent, not knowing so much about what's to come. I mean, things that we worry about now and the future, and when you think about what they were dealing with, it's moving just to think about how they were able to move through that courageously, successfully, etc. And I don't want to get too far ahead. I mean, you tell me. So you do that. You put it in a 50-pound suitcase, and you get here, and then what? Like what do your parents do? I mean, I know a lot of people that had to totally change professions when they immigrated. So like, Tell me a little bit about like, how do they navigate it? How do you navigate it?
Yep. Again, as an adult, like just taking a step back, and then I'll jump into your question. The best I've been able, my parents were younger than I am now when they went through that. So I'm 38. And the best I could explain it to folks is like, imagine if someone tells you China is the better place to be right now, and you don't know anything about Mandarin, you can't bring any more than $100 in a 50-pound suitcase. How would you go about it? Would you even take the leap? So it's kind of nuts that they did for an idea of a better lifestyle. It's really fascinating to think about it. So we went through that in '93 and came here, plopped here with nothing. My parents had a tough way to navigate and find their way. We were on welfare and food stamps for the longest time, and I got to eventually go to a school that, as you know, Brett, in the neighborhood that had a very wild range of wealth. And so, you got kids pulling up in brand new cars with this and that mark. And then you have those that just are fresh off of a food stamp, run to Kroger. So it was, as a kid, it was confusing. As an adult, I can now say, I look back at that, I was definitely the angry kid during all of that. I was the ones like, this is bullshit. Why is it me? Why can't I be like that? I want the cool lifestyle. I personally made a choice to kind of harness that fire and turn it into fuel. I've seen a lot of people that got burnt by that fire, and it ate away in a negative way. But so this is me kind of reflecting on that. But us in that moment, just very little means, living in apartments, trying to leverage friends' relationships. Actually, remember when my parents worked $5.15 an hour? That was the minimum wage. And welding canopies. Education. That's the one thing they can't take away from you. That was definitely drilled home into my head quite a bit. And another neat thing about Columbus is there's a little bit of sense of community. There was many families here. I don't know the exact count, tens, hundreds, that were going through the same thing. So we all kind of stuck together. Sometimes it was not okay because we were kind of all grouped together, but other times it was great because you had kind of safety in numbers, if that makes sense. So again, certainly not sunshine and rainbows. And by the way, I didn't speak any English. And I was one of those kids that didn't adopt really well. It took me a little bit of time to get English right. And if you've ever seen me write, you would think I still haven't adopted to English. I lost my accent. That's probably the only positive thing. I haven't quite mastered the grammatical part of it or the grammar part of it.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, that you describe this experience in many ways. It sounds far from the American dream, right? I mean, there's as you described, it's a pretty great picture to paint, the idea of moving to China and having to learn Mandarin and having $100 and 50-pound suitcase.
In the 14th largest city in China, too, whatever that is.
Yeah, right. So not even the Columbus that we know today. And so, I'm wondering, just thinking about your parents working for 550 an hour and welding awnings, and you not adapting to the language that quickly, and does the American dream change for you in kind of the experience of it, or do you still? And I'm not talking about in reflection, because I certainly think you have lived the American dream. But at the time when you're going through that stage in life, do you feel like, geez, this is far from dreamy?
It was very far from dreamy, for sure. And again, I was the kid that had a grudge. However, everything is relative, Brett. Like, we came from quote unquote slums. So the fact that you can, I remember the eyes on I immigrated with my grandparents. I remember the eyes on their faces when we walked into Kroger, to the grocery store, and every kind of produce is fresh and right there. And you can just grab it, any quantities, and walk out having bananas in the wintertime or fresh apples in the middle of, I don't know what month they're not fresh anymore because I'm not, into that, but they were just like blown away. And so it was very relative, and you can have access to food, and no matter how crappy things were in a stuffy little apartment, it seemed like a palace compared to, outdoor going to the bathroom that you had to sometimes do. So yes and no. I mean, on one hand, it was certainly not the lifestyle that we have today. But at the time, it was very relative to, it's like, you can say whatever you want about the government. There's still programs out there that took care of you, that gave you an honest thing. And it was at the time, people around me, and I think this is what shaped me, would start, family dinners by first saying, God bless America, and how an amazing place this is, and how you could be whatever you want to be. Sure, we didn't start with a silver spoon, but it worked out great.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear you kind of highlight the relative piece, because it's a great perspective, to be able to compare it to a slum and the life that you were living, and still be able to see the gratitude for what the country was offering. And, as we kind of move forward, and I mentioned, my view of you is certainly having, fulfilled on all that is dreamy about opportunity in America. But I'm curious, was it the kind of like almost chip on your shoulder, or that, that fuel that brought you into entrepreneurship, or is that also kind of in the DNA bloodline, in the fact that your parents, I mean, the risk that they took, again, when you describe the, if you were presented with that option and they said yes to it, I mean, the courage, and maybe it's that like the other option was so bad, they just had to take the risk, but still most people don't. So where does this kind of, entrepreneurial and or aversion to risk or tolerance for risk come from?
Yeah, so I think a couple things, but before I go to where I think it came from, what actually was happening around me when I was 10, 11, 12, 13, whatever, every adult male figure around me had their own little business. One of my uncles became a taxi cab driver. He got a medallion. He got a crew working for him. My dad bought a sewing kit, and then he ultimately started sewing things out of the other bedroom in our apartment and called it his mini business that grew all right. And then somebody bought a pawn shop. Somebody became a musician and did venues. So they were all, I didn't know the word at the time, entrepreneur, but they were all quote unquote small business owners and doing things. And again, it's all relatives. When you actually start counting the money, sure, maybe $100 doesn't mean much these days, but back then, US dollars, and you could do so much with it. It was fascinating. So what was happening around me is that a lot of people were doing that, and they were trying to make a name for themselves. And I don't know exactly where that fuel came from, but that's what they were doing. And so I just grew up immersed in that. The other thing that was going on is I was just constantly reminded at every twist and turn that you can really be whatever you want to be here. You don't have that thing in your passport that has your ethnicity and religion. You can become whatever the hell you want, and no one here will stop you. You can wear, whatever you want on the street, whatever color, any time of the day, and there won't be somebody saying to you, "No, go home." Most of the time here. I guess I'm embellishing a little bit, but you get the idea. And I just had this like drilled in over and over and over, and I was seeing it over and over and over, and that felt great, man. That felt awesome. Yeah, sure, kids pick on you at school, but when adults give you that kind of encouragement, it's actually happening aloud around you. That was fascinating. Now, when I go back as an adult to like think about all that, sure, that's all wonderful. I do think that my family heritage has a lot to do with it, because at every generation we have moved. That at every generation there was some terrible, terrible thing that happened that you got to get through, and they did. And now I'm complaining about the size of my Starbucks order. And you laugh because every problem is like silly little thing.
Yeah. Well, your Starbucks order is a bit intricate, so it's not like my black coffee. So you have a little more to complain about there. Well, it makes sense, and I do think that there's this environmental thing and this heritage, and then your own experience that really contribute to your state of being, and having smart, hardworking, motivated people hustling and being creative all around you has got to have an impact, especially when this has been going on for generations. Tell me a little bit as you start to kind of move through high school into college, kind of what happens and when the first kind of, real entrepreneurial commitment or effort happens.
As I've already said, I was the kid that had the fire. Why isn't it me? Why don't I have a safety net? So it was a little tough to go through high school with that mentality. But I was surrounded by a fun group of friends that were foolish like me that made it fun. So we got through, and I don't know. I think it's everything that I'm just describing in you. I just never for a second thought I would work for a company. Like I just didn't. That thought has never crossed my mind. It did a little bit later here and there, but not at that stage. I just saw, every figure around me have their own small business. That's what I got to do. It's that simple. I also wanted to prove something. I really wanted to prove that I could just overtake everything that's around me. So that was my high school experience in a nutshell. Obviously, a lot of more twists and turns in there. My first gig, which I'll proudly say, was I really needed to pay for spring break. High school, senior year, spring break. Everyone was going to Mexico or Florida or whatever. And my parents didn't have any money, certainly not enough to pay for a foolish Cancun trip. And I really wanted to do it. And I was not going to be left out. So I decided this was actually right around the time eBay was starting to be hot. I don't know how this all came about, but I started driving around every pawn shop in Columbus and buying old Nintendo 64s and PlayStations and immediately selling them on eBay for like 20, 30, 40 bucks more. To the point where like a 1 week, I remember I drove around every pawn shop and I cleaned them all out. There were just no more Nintendo 64s that I could flip like that. Or maybe they just caught on that selling them on eBay they could do themselves. But that was my first thing. So I was like, I can buy something and find a market to sell it for a little bit more, make a margin. That margin's my profit. And then we had like a whole little thing of people packing boxes, etc. But it was out of a need to do something fun. And I actually turned it into a business by adding more than just N64s, other items, and had a whole system down and continue to go and grow that. That was my first big splash at it, of how to go around it. And there's actually a lot of people around here that have like all sorts of odd end things that they buy and parse it out and sell as littler items at a markup.
Oh yeah, no question. In fact, I'm just reminded of Bruce again. He introduced me to a friend or shared with me a friend of his that made a massive business selling toys on Amazon until I think Amazon actually purchased the company. It's you were definitely onto something, even if it was, a relative and at the time and to pay for spring break, that was pretty forward thinking, when you look back.
Yep. That was actually my first jump into IT or computers. My mom actually went into IT, and a lot of my family did IT in the medical profession. And that's when I started just messing around and learning that I really like it and being on it. And there's this whole world that you can access through AOL at the time that exists and something to do with it. So I think a lot of it stemmed from that.
Yeah. Okay. And so you go to Ohio State, and it seems like the logical natural progression. You got a big university in your hometown, in-state tuition. Was that like a no-brainer for you, or did you consider going elsewhere?
Yeah, based on the heritage and kind of where I'm from and what I do, and if others are listening to this with similar backgrounds, kids aren't allowed to leave their house, not until their early 20s. And so it wasn't like you have three schools. You have Capital down the street, you have OSU, or you can go to a local community college. Just do something, but stay home for a little bit longer. So
what did you study?
I studied whatever would get me a degree quickest.
Okay.
That was my scheme. And I'm not proud of it. And I hope my kids will never listen to this podcast, but I certainly, zigzagged and weaved in this and that. I ended up graduating with international business degree.
Yeah.
But turns out in Fisher Business School, you're supposed to maintain a certain GPA for them to keep you. I learned about that after the fact. But OSU was a fantastic experience. I was half in, half out the entire time. My parents made it a non-negotiable. You have to come home with that diploma. I had so much entrepreneurial, spirit in me at the time that it was hard to do both. But I had a company and things going and growing. But I did manage to get an international business degree in 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I have a funny story about that if you want to hear for a second.
Mm-hmm.
I paid for OSU because I had a food cart. That's how I paid for the tuition. My friend and I bought a Wienermobile, is what we called it. We sold hot dogs and gyros outside of OSU football games. And first of all, it's amazing what people will pay for a hot dog. Just fascinating as the day go by.
Especially after a few beers.
Yeah, as the day goes by, the prices shoot through the roof, let me tell you.
Right.
And in 8 games, home games, you can make enough money running that food cart to pay for years of tuition at that time. I don't know what it is right now, but that's what we did. And that's when I got my sales skills all sharpened up.
Yeah, great. So, it's an interesting thing, and I want to, kind of fast forward into your professional life that emerges. But, obviously this entrepreneurial spirit is so high. And I'm like you, I was, I don't even know if I had a half that was in. I was out mostly and out for a variety of reasons, but a lot of my kind of interest were in other things, and including in the world of, being creative and eventually an entrepreneur. Wasn't, the word I was using at the time. But I have the same thing where I'm like, well, I want my kids to go to college and I want them to get a degree and I want them to study and I want them to learn. Yet, your experience was not that. And it was also very rich, very full, very educational in its own way and led you kind of perfectly where you needed to go. So, how do you feel about that kind of dynamic, which I think, even more and more as time goes on, people are seeing, boy, is college worth it?
Yeah, I certainly don't want the message to be bad students get ahead. That is not at all what I'm trying to promote here. And when I said that, my degree was a non-negotiable for my parents, I agreed with that. It's not like I told them that they were foolish, that it's not necessary. I understand the value of a good education. I just sometimes was a little squirmy about it. It was never never from the start for a second in my mind anything but living the American dream. I didn't call it that until just very recently, but I wanted a big house, big lawn, fun cars, a wife, kids, vacations, the whole shebang. I wanted to pay my taxes. I wanted to, wave the little flag over 4th of July parades. I wanted that so bad because I grew up in a neighborhood where I saw like every other house having that. Period. End of story. And until I lived on the street that I wanted to live, and until I have that picture I could take outside that I want to take, I'm not resting for a second. Again, like I said, part of that was just anger, and I was able to put that fire into good use. But the other part of it was just kind of the logic I think I was instilled in. Education helped tremendous. OSU helped tremendous. Like I said, it was a great experience because it was like a little city for kids in a big city for adults, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
You can like dabble with things at OSU and understand how people would react and still have not the consequences of the big city. I hope that relates to others.
Yeah, Ilya, I think that most people know you for Bold Penguin today. And I think many people know that you founded Root Insurance. And yet I don't know that many people know much before those two big companies today. And I want to make sure we talk about those experiences, but maybe you can kind of give us a little highlight reel as to what you did with that diploma before you started to land on some of these eventual unicorns.
Sure. Do I have to? They were horrible.
Well, I think that's helpful for the audience who might be going through it now.
Yeah. Those that have emailed me see a little tag, 9 out of 10 things you do fail. One success is worth all the tries. I have had so many failures. It's ridiculous. I probably like have a scroll that rolls down and outside the room if you were starting to list them. But every single one, it's like a kid getting your hand burnt and learning not to touch it again. Certainly valuable lessons. I didn't go into it to learn a bad lesson. It happened, and I wrote it down. So I had debt consolidation business. I had a marketing company for law firms. I had quick get rich schemes online. I had other marketing PR companies. I had an insurance agency, which instilled what I'm doing today. The list goes on and on and on. Never shortage of ideas or things I wanted to pump out. It probably wasn't until my fourth one that didn't turn out okay that I actually started writing down a little bit of a learning lesson. Just a little note in my Evernote, a few sentences about what I think I did wrong and then what I think went wrong. So 2 or 3 sentences around that. Try to use it. But each one has shaped me. Insurance has been a theme in what I do, certainly. I had an insurance agency, 2 of them. We had a tech company we built around an insurance agency. And that just as a industry is something I started to gravitate towards because it was old, it was boring, it was all messed up. People really don't understand much underneath the surface. And that seemed like, to me, the perfect kind of thing to get into. Try to build and make margin in the messiness that doesn't seem sexy. And so to kind of summarize what I'm ranting here is I've tried a lot of different things. Certainly, each one has given me a little bit more capital and a little bit more personal strength to go out and do the bigger things. Shipyard was one right before Root. I partnered up with a few folks in town in Columbus to run a pretty large, what became later as a marketing ad tech company. And that gave me the courage and some things that I learned along the way about myself to go for the bigger opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm wondering, because of the many efforts and then also the kind of landing in the insurance space, the shipyard experience, then to Root to Bold Penguin, how much of the path is about your unique ability on the start and the kind of excitement and energy that goes into that early creation of a business versus, the eventual operating role that is inevitable as you land and ground and grow.
Yeah.
Are you more wired as a front end quick start, and that's why you've been able to have so many ideas and kind of move into so many things, even if they didn't always work?
I learned that about myself, and only until a couple of years ago did I proudly start saying that. It was something that I was a little ashamed of because I didn't think I was well rounded. So at that time, I thought I was starting a business that I was going to have forever with every single one of them, that I was going to run and pass on to another generation, maybe even. But what I learned about myself is I am a lot more excited. I'm a lot more energized. I'm a lot more successful. I can get other people along from 0 to 60 or 0 to 100 or 0 to 10, whatever Richter scale you want to use. And it wasn't until a couple of years ago that I even said to others, "Hey, I'm really the startup guy that can get things going." And I actually have a bit of a formula in my head to how that is, how that works. I'm happy to share that. But it took a lot of learning lessons about myself. Where do I fit into that journey? At the beginning, in the middle, towards the end, or the next evolution or rebirth?
Yeah, I wonder if like some of those notes you were taking along the way with the quote failures, was part of that learning that it didn't work because at a certain point somebody else needs to be involved to, make it work. Was that part of the learning, or was that not something that you were even present to until later?
No, totally. I started taking notice. I'm getting so many good practice runs at starting something that each time I'm getting better and better at it. It's never, graduated all the way to the end to learn the other parts of it. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's a great thing to highlight because I'm a big believer in finding your unique ability, which is the thing that you're really good at and that you love to do. And that being the way to drive the most value to the business. And then putting people around you that are also in their unique abilities. And that's just kind of what I'm hearing you discovering what yours was and then how to complement that. Tell me a little bit, whatever you want. I know we've got about 10 minutes left and I want to make sure we talk about Bold Penguin. Tell me, about Root and anything that you feel is relevant for the audience to hear.
Sure. Just a little bit back to what you were saying. My favorite interview question right now is, what is your superpower? That I like to ask people. That's my way of asking, what are you really good at? Or what have you perfected over time? It takes a while for people to get into that. And actually, most people smirk kind of like you did.
Well, it's funny.
I'm not a superhero. I don't.
Yeah. Well, no. I actually totally agree. One of the kind of funny kind of quotes at our company is I was once in a meeting with a whole bunch of designers. I might have told this story before on the podcast, but they were dreaming up things and they were amazing and they were also never going to work or be within our budget. And I said, our superpower is we get shit done. And they all thought that was like the, most amazing thing. I'm like, no, I'm not kidding. We dream big, but we get shit done. And it's a superpower of ours. And I believe in, these are our superpowers. I love it.
Yep. No, that's it. I have understood what mine is, I think. And you always learn, right? You always adapt, and every few years you change, but I think that's it for me. And I try to get it out of everyone around me because everyone has that. Everyone has something they learned, whether you want to admit it or not. You're really damn good at this and you're the best at it in the world, for sure. Just got to just zoom in on that. Everyone has an amazing superpower.
It's great.
Yeah. So, Bold Penguin, and just working a little bit backwards from that, I, through my years of starting upness, if that's even a word, I learned that insurance is an industry, and it's a huge industry. What does insurance even mean? There's just tons and tons there. That as an industry is something that works for me. I've had a little bit more success in insurance than other industries. I also figured out that I live in like the best freaking city for insurance. There's literally a street downtown that you can walk down and hit a couple major headquarters of different insurance companies. And then when you start looking at like the employment, insurance employs a bazillion people around here. So things were starting to like kind of click in my head subconsciously that, hey, like maybe I should do something in that because of all these right ingredients. There must be something in the water here. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I actually had a pretty good run at running at an insurance agency at the time. So I got some hand-to-hand combat. I know what it's like. I know what I'm personally good or bad at, and I'm starting to understand what people want and don't want past the surface of like car insurance and home insurance. What does that actually mean? So a lot of those things were coming together. I also learned from my experience that, or I believe that everything that is a startup requires 3 parts to the stool. You need idea, capital, and people. And they got to be equal parts of the stool. One can't be more than the other. You can't have a lot of capital, but like a foolish team that's building it, or you can't have a best idea, but the wrong people doing it, so on and so forth. You really need people, idea, capital. And it was starting to formulate in my head that an idea exists where no one really understands how business insurance is bought and sold, or sometimes it's painful, or why it's painful. Capital, I've learned over the years of how to leverage, how to borrow money. I've had a fantastic run with understanding how venture capital works and when to use that, because that is another thing that's like fire. If you're like paying with matches, if you don't do it right, that'll burn you up. If you do it right, it's right. And I certainly haven't mastered it, but I understood enough about the basics. And I spent a lot of years in Columbus networking so I could really bring in the right team. And so it was all the ingredients that I needed for Bold Penguin. I just want to digress for a second there about the right team. People ask me all the time, why Columbus? Yes, I immigrated here, but there's nothing else holding me to it. For a business, I really can't think of a better place. I think you and I grabbed coffee the other day, and I mentioned like you're always 2 or 3 coffees away from anyone you want to meet. It's magical. I mean, that's just not the case in many other cities. If you really want to meet someone, you can here. Just put your mind to it. And so I was able to, in my head, back to Bold Penguin, find the right team through all the networking, attract enough capital, and have enough of my own, since had a couple fantastic run, one which actually went public. And the idea that I had was in insurance, buying and selling commercial insurance or business insurance is a little tricky, and sometimes it takes a little longer than you need it to. So perhaps we can make a splash there. It was right around the same time that I realized what I can do better than anyone else, that I believe my superpower is to take this from 0 to 100. And while it's obvious that like here's a gap, why isn't anyone doing about it? The not so obvious is the hard work that goes into building and taking it from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to all the way to 100. And that's what I decided to focus all my time and energy on. And that became Bold Penguin, and it became a huge company.
Massive company, including, a recent transaction, which is, probably in some ways a bit of an exclamation point on, your career to this point. And in some ways, maybe it's just the beginning. But, I am curious, and maybe you can share a little bit with the audience, just, for a minute or two, the kind of big learnings, because you did go 0 to 100. You took, from my perspective, you took all of the experience. And this is why, I love this format of the podcast, because I can see the trace back through your lineage, through your, courage to come here, to the, chip on your shoulder, to the pawn shop eBay, and on and on and on. All of that experience, it appears like you put it all to work at Bold Penguin. And you've had a tremendous amount of success pretty quickly. And I know in the startup world and the VC world, like things can happen fast, but we all know that in a lot of cases they just die. It doesn't happen at all, let alone as fast as it's happened with Bold Penguin. So maybe you could just say, like, one, is it true that's like the culmination of all your experience, and two, what's it been like to kind of take it from the beginning to the recent transaction?
Yeah, I'll start out by saying it's not for the faint of hearts. It is not as cool and awesome as it is when you read it. It is not as glamorous about if you see it through the pictures. There's a lot of shitty, hard, dark moments. And that's the majority of it, by the way, a lot of hard work. So I'd like to start with that. I'm not trying to scare anyone away from it. I'm just trying to be real that past the glamour and the pictures and the high fives, there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that goes into a day in and day out. If Bold Penguin was a sport, or starting Bold Penguin was a sport, or if this was a finals game, I could proudly say that I left everything on the court. There was not a square inch of me that I would say I held back or hedged or reserved. Everything was out there and took it all the way to the wall every single time, every second. It took everything out of me. I mean, even the things I didn't even think I had. So again, I'm not trying to scare anybody, but I'm just trying to keep it real. Like it's survival mode, and you got to be ready to drop dead on the middle of the court there if this was a sport. And
is it a sport that you love?
Right. I'm madly in love with it.
Yeah. And I just want to make sure we like say that because it is, but I think it's that love for it that fuels you to go through it.
I couldn't imagine doing anything else. Yeah. Really. It's crazy. And that was the other thing I wanted to say to give others. Is it true? I would also say, like, what I went through for the last 5 years of Bold Penguin, you have to be crazy. You can't be a normal person. You have to be slightly not okay up there. And I can say with a joking, a little bit self-deprecating humor, to go in and say, like, I'm going to fall off a freaking cliff if I don't do this right. And that's okay. And by the way, I don't have a parachute. Here we go. Every day. So it is not logical by any means. There is no straight arrow, a straight shot. You have to just go all in on that, and it's a very fun ride, and I enjoy it. Is it? Absolutely, all the things I learned about myself and the business helped get it to where it is today. But one thing stood out the most to me, and that is the work of other people. I think that in a company, especially a tech company, especially the one, we're one of the largest insurtech deals. We sold to American Family Insurance and continue to live on. I'm excited about this next chapter, which hopefully you'll invite me to another podcast to talk about. But Bold Penguin isn't done. This is just the starting line. But to get here, it is not a one-man job. It is not a one-woman show. It takes a whole freaking colony to pull something like this off. And the biggest learning lesson I got out of this, other than, it's not for the faint of hearts, which is just a statement, is it really takes a lot of exceptional people that are hand-selected, working together very hard to do something like this. It's a team sport.
No question. No question. And I think the fact that you highlight that and that you're aware of that, says a lot about who you are and why people want to work with you and take your lead. I know that you're up against the 12 o'clock here, and I want to be respectful of your time. Final thoughts, and maybe what I'd love to hear is you have the American dream. You have the house and the 4th of July parade and the family and whatever else you dreamed of is available to you. What's it like? How does it compare? Now that you're here, is it what you thought it would be?
It just hit me, by the way. I know it's silly to say, but I talk about the American dream so much. The company is American Family Insurance. It just hit me.
Yeah, that's great. I love it.
But a couple of things there. The way we structured this deal was for Bold Penguin to live on and for it to be a fully autonomous, independent business that continues to flourish, because we just scratched the surface in what we're doing and we're just not done yet. And the part that's great about all of this is so far, and into the future, that continues to be the case. I work with exceptional people. Bull Penguin's still Bull Penguin. I do what I want and think is right for the company, and we continue to flourish as a team. There's a lot of really smart people around me that are way better than me and all these other things, and they continue to drive it forward. So it's been, in some ways, business as usual. In other ways, we have like more equipment to go on to this next journey or this next act. If you are into hiking and this is the Mount Everest, imagine us getting to base camp 2, and we have reinforcements of oxygen and all the food and all the things you need. So it's been absolutely stunningly amazing. I got exactly what I bargained for, and we have all the firepower we need to conquer the world. I'm excited. I'm like, as I'm talking to you, I'm even excited about it. The other part of it is I don't feel like I actually accomplished all that much. I mean, sure, there's been obviously some successes, but I do have this chip on my shoulder still, or there's probably a more positive way to say it, but I have this internal desire to do something. I heard a saying the other day, you go from success to significance. I don't think I did the significance part. And Bull Penguin can be significant. And so we're continuing on with that. And that you go on that journey, not by yourself, but with many others, and you can go further. So we're continuing to recruit exceptional people, and we continue to harness the power of our partnerships and customers and go boldly into the future. Just see what I did there. So it's very exciting and thrilling. I would say that it's also the excitement is the uncertainty. I've not been here before. I don't know what it's like to be acquired and continue to run your company. I have every intention to make it just amazing. But the exciting thing is it's not spelled out, and it's for ours to make amazing. And Bull Penguin has always been a place where I get to create something. Like literally whatever we're doing today did not exist in the universe yesterday. That is so thrilling. That's so fun. That's so exciting that we continue to do that. And I'm just jazzed up to know where it's going to go tomorrow and the day after.
Ilya, thank you for sharing all of that. And just, as a friend, it's a real pleasure to watch you on this journey. And chip on the shoulder might not be right. It's more now energy, enthusiasm, desire, hunger, whatever you want to call it, that I think is fueling you now. That significance piece is a great aim. And, you are amazing in the uncertainty. I mean, this is where you thrive. And so to be at base camp 2 with all those tools and still have it be uncertain, I just have no doubt it will be significant, and it's fun to watch, and it's good to be with you today and along from an observer seat as a friend. So thanks again for your time, for everything you shared, and keep up the great work.
Thanks for having me. This was a blast to talk about everything. Keep on doing this too. That's a great way to spread the message for many people.
Wonderful. Take care. Thanks.